Hello and welcome to the King Pair podcast. The Super 12 of the T20 World Cup 2022 is done, and we have our four semi finalists, them being India, Pakistan, England, and New Zealand. Now, the Super 12 of this year was something to behold. There were a lot of upsets, if you want to call them that, and there were some not so upsetting matches that just happened, and let's not get to them. But before we get to the actual matches, here's a simple question that I wanted to ask you stuff. First of all, hello, how are you, and how have you been recently, and was this the best World Cup ever as of now? So let's start off with the game that kicked off the Super 12, and that was Australia versus New Zealand. And the first thing that happened in the game was literally the first over, where Finn Allen took off. And I mean, is there anything to talk about the Finn Allen show? Because it is literally what it is. I mean, there's nothing that you can talk or say about it that will, explain it better or make it much better. I mean, it is what it is. How do you perceive the whole, Finn Allen taking off in the power play itself, especially given that it was against the home team itself?
It's just very symbolic of what ended up happening this tournament with New Zealand once again breezing into the knockouts, and it totally crushed Australia. And this is Australia's one defeat of the tournament, and it was so bad that it left them third on a net run rate tie, which ultimately kicked them out. So yeah, like Finn Allen just taking off in that power play, sort of symbolic of Australia, who were one of the tournament favorites, getting completely blown away, quite surprisingly, might I add, by New Zealand, who I don't think many people gave them much of a chance at this one.
And as opposed to Finn Allen, the Devon Conway show was, I think, it was pretty much completely opposite of what Finn Allen did. I mean, he took his time. It was long and sustained, unlike Finn Allen, who was just short and explosive.
Oh yeah, that's you need a mix of that to get you to good scores, especially in Australia, especially against a team like Australia. And yeah, I saw them to 200. Perhaps a little unlucky to not get a few more balls to reach his 100, but it is what it is. And yeah, 200, that was always going to be really tough for Australia to chase, but I don't think anyone quite expected them to do as badly as they did.
And talking of polar opposites, when we look at the Aussie and Kiwi bowling lineups, they have a lot of things in common. I mean, they have one left arm pacer, there's a right arm pacer or two, there's a left arm offie and a leggy. I mean, those have almost the exact same composition, yet their performances were almost opposite.
Yeah, just on the day, Australia were undone by really solid batting by New Zealand, really explosive batting, and the Australian batters, some of them in poor form, some of them underperforming, just never got going.
Mitchell Santner is probably one of the most innocuous looking bowlers who has been doing well for now, what, 6 or 7 years. I mean, if you look at his bowling action or what stuff he bowls, it seems very simple and very to the point.
Yeah, and just like opening game of 2016, he goes up against the hosts and plays a big part in completely annihilating the batting lineup, which was not expected of him before the tournament, even before the match. Even like as he walked up to bowl his first delivery, wasn't expected at all for that to happen.
And moving on to the second game, that was Afghanistan versus England. I think, even though when you look at the scorecard, there's nothing really to be, shocked by. The interesting thing that I observed in this game was how much it was a precursor to England's batting struggles in the next game. I mean, they took a lot of time chasing down a very small total, and then against Ireland, it kind of came back to haunt them when the total was much higher to chase.
Yeah, as you said, much like the opening game, Australia New Zealand, this game also highlighted a lot of themes that we'd see going throughout the tournament, particularly with England. Um, they have this much vaunted batting lineup, but they've never really clicked all tournament. And this first game against Afghanistan, that yeah, like they were able to do just enough to make the target, but they didn't. They were not the most convincing, but they also never looked like losing, which isn't really what you'd expect from England, and that's sort of what happened throughout the tournament for them. And, like the one time they did lose, it does come in similar circumstances against Ireland, as we'll get to in a little bit.
When it comes to England and their victories in this tournament, I mean, against New Zealand or even against Afghanistan, I think one of the most important cog in that machine would be Sam Curran and his recent rise in the T20 format, because he got a fifer against Afghanistan, and he bowled really well against New Zealand as well. And if you were following the Australia series before that, he had similar form coming into the World Cup. So, how have you seen the rise of Sam Curran, the T20 bowler? And it is interesting because when you look at the team, obviously they had lost Reece Topley to somewhat of a freak accident, if you want to say it, the whole stepping on the boundary cushion thing. And just like India, you thought they would be, in kind of a big trouble without Reece Topley. But I think Sam Curran, Chris Wokes, Mark Wood, Adil Rashid all have been really good as far as this tournament goes till now.
Yeah, like as I said, England's bowling has been what's keeping them in games, which isn't what you'd usually expect from New England of late. But yeah, it's a team that's continuing to evolve, continuing to get better. This is probably the best their bowling has done in quite a while, and the fact that they're winning games, that they're batting doing well, that's it's quite a positive sign for them.
And now that we have talked about bowlers, how about we talk about those Netherlands bowlers as well? I mean, it will ultimately get to the game where their bowling paid off completely. But before that, they're bowling in the game against Bangladesh, where I think they managed to stop Bangladesh on a reasonably small total after the start they had. And I mean, I didn't know much about Paul von Meekeren before the World Cup happened, but I think he has been probably the most impressive of the bunch as of now.
Yeah, the Netherlands' bowling has always been quite decent throughout this whole cycle. 2019, when they win the World Cup qualifier up till this World Cup, it's usually been their batting that's held them back. But they have a decent core of bowlers. Some young, some little older, some more experienced. Like Makerin is 29. This is his third World Cup. It's not like he came into this as a complete unknown, but yeah, like this is the best he's ever been, and yeah, he's really shown that at this tournament. They they held Bangladesh down, and again, it was their batting that sort of disappointed them in the end.
And it is especially impressive, how good Bas de Leida has been. I mean, yes, he has sprayed it here and there sometimes, but if you look at it from an overall perspective, I think he has done really well against some pretty imposing oppositions.
Yeah, he's definitely a useful bowler, uh, solid batter as well. Uh, and yeah, like he's the type of player you can really start to build a team around. His batting didn't come off against Bangladesh, unfortunately, but it happens sometimes. And yeah, not the end of the world.
Moving on to a game that probably raised a lot of questions in everyone's mind, the South Africa versus Zimbabwe game that ultimately ended up being a draw. But as I said, there were a lot of fingers raised about how the game went on. There's obviously questions from both sides on whether the game should have started in the first place in the second innings, or should it have continued had it started. How did you see the whole thing? I mean, it was what 12 overs worth of a game, and it was all chaos. Especially the decision making from the umpires was atrocious to say the least from my end.
Yeah, like, because it was a World Cup, there's more pressure to get these games played, to get them through that minimum amount. And I feel like that's probably why they went onto the field after Zimbabwe's innings ended, even though they probably shouldn't have, because it was really wet, and one of Zimbabwe's bowlers got injured. And so after that, Zimbabwe were just using their part-time spinners to avoid injury. Because this is why we don't play cricket in the rain, because especially fast bowlers, the way they run in and bowl, it's really dangerous when the pitch is wet and sticky. Uh, so yeah, like next time there's a rain delay and you say, why don't they just play in the rain, suck it up? This is why, because you will get players getting injured, or either players will get injured, or to avoid injury, you'll use the lesser players to bowl, and yeah, it just makes for a lower quality viewing experience, which I don't think we really want to see. And yeah, like after they went on the field, they played 3 overs and then they called it off. And yeah, again, like it raises a lot of questions about like what what's the limits for DLS, because South Africa were ahead of the 5 over target, but because it hadn't been 5 overs, it was declared a no result, even though if they had gone back on at any point, they would have won the match then and there. Um, but like at the same time, if you do that, the only team that can win is the batting team, because there's no way the bowling team can get 10 wickets in less than 30 deliveries, which is the only win condition for them. It's a lot easier for the batting team to make 30 runs in however many balls or whatever, like to break their DLS total at the 5 over mark. And yeah, like it's something that gets debated a lot and something that should be talked about a lot. And especially at the higher levels, it's something that there should be a lot more discussion about. But yeah, like the way the rules are now, uh, the decision to take them off the field at 3 overs was justified, and I honestly think they probably should have not started South Africa's innings at all. But yeah, like it showed a lot of the both the problems and the considerations of the rain that I feel like a lot of people do not think about when it's a bilateral series, until the umpires are a lot more willing to take the players off the field for a little bit of rain. And yeah, like because this is a rare instance where they played through quite a bit of rain. Now you see like why they don't usually do this, because it's not a great viewing experience, and it's not really beneficial for anyone to play like this.
And moving on from bad umpiring decisions to bad organization. I mean, there was another game that was affected by the rain, and there was Ireland versus England. I mean, firstly, Ireland played really well for what 35 overs of the game. They were pretty much always in the driving seat with that total. But that again raises the same question, because all it took was 10 minutes of rain to basically then say, okay, that is it, game over, England lose. It was more of England lose than Ireland win, I guess, the way that result came upon.
I mean, again, like this is the rules the for how the rain rules work. England, it started to rain, so they had to go off the field, and then they have a strict time limit by which the match must be finished. So, because they had already come up on that time limit, that was the end of the game. It wasn't just because it was 10 minutes of rain. The next game right after this was completely rained out, so it's not like the rain was going to go away. Um, yeah, like that's just what happens when it rains. There's a time limit you have to finish the game by, and you can't do anything about it.
And it leaves you kind of thinking, don't you? I mean, obviously, the South Africa game was more of an kind of moving towards an obvious end where South Africa would win. This one seemed like it was moving towards a point where you could probably expect multiple endings. Maybe England would win as they usually do, or maybe Ireland could hold them back. So, you know, that uh, I mean, England has a right to blame the conditions or organization or whatever. But I mean, ultimately, do you think these kind of things give us the fair winner at the end?
Like obviously they won't always give the same result as if no rain had come and we would have gotten a full 20 overs. Like there's just no other way to really handle this. Either like in my eye, it's either every game that gets a little bit of rain will be declared a no result because you can't possibly get 20 overs aside in, or you have to do a compromise like DLS, which it's based in math. It has a reasonably solid foundation, and it keeps getting worked on. I think DLS is the best way to solve rain affected games, and it's unfortunate that it costs us some result, but like there's not much else we can really do about it. So maybe it's fair, maybe it's not fair, but it's the only real way you can do anything about it.
This game basically happened a day or two after the Australia versus Sri Lanka game, and I think that game was basically the prototype of how Sri Lanka performed and how Australia performed in the World Cup. I mean, you see Australia winning games from then on. They defeated obviously Sri Lanka, then Ireland, and then Afghanistan, while Sri Lanka lost to that Australia in that game, then New Zealand, and then England. and you can see both the teams were not really convincing. Neither Sri Lanka was, you know, didn't seem like competing that much. They did compete a little in every game, but let the opposition through when it was time to, win the game itself. And Australia looked like they were just kind of crawling towards the victory in every game. Like here, where they were basically helped by Stoinis and Maxwell. Then there was game against Ireland where they seemed like they didn't want to win at all. And I mean, the Afghanistan game is what it is. I don't think anyone can explain how good that Rashid Khan innings was and how bad Australia was in general. Those games. I mean, what do you think of these performances by Australia and Sri Lanka? Because both were coming off real highs. One was coming off an Asia Cup win, and other was literally a world champion a few days ago, and now they're both out.
Yeah, so Sri Lanka beat the teams you'd expect them to beat, and lost to the teams you'd expect them to not beat. And yeah, Australia is actually quite similar. They beat the teams you'd expect them to win against, and lost to the teams where it was at least a bit of a toss-up. And yeah, in both cases, Australia was never the most convincing winner, and Sri Lanka also wasn't the most convincing winner. And even when they lost, they usually were not blown out too badly. But yeah, like it shows you two teams who are roughly where they should be. They didn't really pull any surprises. Like the most surprising thing was Australia losing to New Zealand in the first place. But um, after that, everything went about as expected. So it shows you that these are two teams where you know what you get. And yeah, at this World Cup, they didn't pull any surprises. But it shows you, at least at the very least, that they are where they should be, and that's at least a good starting point to get better after this.
Thing was with Sri Lanka was that in those upcoming games, sorry, passing games with New Zealand and England, you could see their batting and bowling kind of falling to a level where you don't expect a team that has just won a tournament to fall at that level. I mean, their fielding was atrocious against New Zealand, and it would kind of be a disservice to the ton that Glenn Phillips scored in that game because it was a really well paced innings.
Yeah, they won the Asia Cup with a lot of their players just hitting a really great high all at the same time, and then that's obviously not sustainable to always win. So they came back to where they should be, and yeah, it's unlucky for them that they didn't do better at the World Cup, but it happens sometimes. Sometimes everything goes right for you, and you end up winning a lot, which is what happened at the Asia Cup, and sometimes it doesn't go that way, and that's what happened with Sri Lanka at this World Cup. Um, like they were a little lucky in they won the games that they should have, so that ensured that they finished fourth. Otherwise, they would have been in some danger of not automatically qualifying for the next World Cup, and maybe having to go through a regional qualifier, or if they, I think probably the ranking would have saved them well enough, but it would have made the qualification process more difficult for someone else. But yeah, in the end, it worked out all right for them. They, at the very least, finished fourth in their group, which I don't think is too. I don't think they'll be too disappointed with finishing fourth in their group. They may be disappointed with some of the results, but it's not the end of the world for them. Yeah, again, it's just what happens sometimes. It went their way at the Asia Cup, and like you're talking about fielding and catches being taken. I feel like that's just for most teams. That's very much a confidence thing. During the Asia Cup, they were on a high. Um, Everything was going their way, so it's just catches just came easier for them because they were well up in confidence. And then once that adrenaline was gone after winning the Asia Cup, playing the next few games, and things not going as well, and at this World Cup they lost to Namibia in the first round. Um, and yeah, they're up against different teams again. Like, the confidence isn't quite there, so the catches don't come as easy for them. Yeah, I feel like that's just what happened. They didn't have like some of the almost magic that followed them throughout the Asia Cup that was gone by this point, and so yeah, so some of that luck that went their way, weren't able to recreate that here.
Moving on to the remaining teams, Ireland and Afghanistan, and you know there was a common thing with both the teams outside of that Ireland versus England game. I think you could see a lot of individual brilliance for both the teams. I mean, both teams took Australia really close. Lorcan Tucker for Ireland and Rashid Khan for Afghanistan. But outside of them, that I don't think outside of that one game, obviously for Ireland, and out of these individual performances, I don't think a lot worked out for them, especially in the batting department.
Yeah, so again, these are two teams. Um, it's not that much of experience at playing at this level. This is like the most games they've played in a row against full members um, that aren't each other in a long time. Like Afghanistan played at this stage of the last World Cup as well, but aside from that, they don't really get these chances very often. So yeah, like it's you got what you expected from them. You got some good showings, you got some close run games, you got some not close run games. It's just what happens sometimes. At the very least, both teams they were always fighting to the end, which I think they will take in decent enough stride. And like this tournament wasn't disastrous for either team, which is a lot better than what you can say for Afghanistan at the 2019 World Cup, which was a properly disastrous tournament. And probably really threatened a lot of things with them. But for both Ireland and Afghanistan, this tournament wasn't awful, and they showed that they can compete at this level, that they do belong at this level, and they will take that with confidence and take that into the next cycle with them. Afghanistan, they still have some ODIs to play. Ireland still has some ODIs to play. Then Ireland has a qualifier to play for the next T20 World Cup. Afghanistan's almost certain to qualify straight for the next ODI World Cup, so that frees up some time for them to try and sneak in some more games against other full members. And yeah, like this, it's just going to be a continuous process of trying to get better for both of these teams. And this World Cup has shown that they do belong at this level, and they can and will get better. They just need that time, that patience to actually get better.
And especially talking about Ireland, I think it would kind of be an injustice if we do not talk about the Joshua Little hat trick against the New Zealand, and that was a really well deserved moment for this team because, as we said, even though a lot of results didn't go their way, I mean they could have, except the England game, but ultimately I think it was a really good moment for the team. That has shown a lot of promise in the bowling department. Also, don't mind that explosion.
What was that explosion?
It is kind of leftover from Diwali, I guess.
Okay.
Please go on. Yeah, so talking about Joshua Little and his hat trick. And moving on to the other group. And there were a lot of games where things were kind of escalating and de escalating every once in a while. I mean, Zimbabwe versus Pakistan game. There was that India versus South Africa game. And then there was also the Bangladesh versus Zimbabwe game. And my simple question is, how bad do things have to be comically bad? Because these games had some of probably the best cricket played, and at the same time these games also had some of the worst things that we had seen in the World Cup. I mean, Pakistan's batting, again, as I said, some of the worst temperament shown in a chase. Then there was India's fielding in the South Africa game again, and then there was the whole Bangladesh versus Zimbabwe game where literally both the teams were trying to lose the game itself. So again, the question rises: how bad does it have to be comically bad?
And comically bad is a matter of interpretation, and it all depends on how funny you think teams trying to not win is. But yeah, like there was a lot of very funny cricket, a lot of very silly cricket, a lot of very weird cricket, and a lot of very fun jokes to be had at everyone's expense. And I don't think anyone was left out. Bangladesh, they got that monkey off their back of their win, so that stat I parroted a lot is no longer valid. But they also did lose to teams they probably should have beaten. They lost from some winnable positions, and they did not make the next round. Uh, South Africa came into this World Cup as one of the quiet favorites. Uh, a lot of people were saying, "Oh, this is South Africa is back. They're gonna win this World Cup," and they showed they showed their medal for the first three games, and they lost the next two, and did not make the semifinals. Meanwhile, Pakistan had two disastrous games up front, but then they ended up making the semifinals. Um and yeah, like India was the most comfortable one, but they also had that loss to South Africa where uh, they just sort of let it go. And yeah, like every team came out of this group with some positives, some negatives, and I don't think anyone was really left out.
And the funniest thing was, at one point it looked like Zimbabwe had a really easy shot at probably getting into the semis. All they needed to do was defeat Netherlands and Bangladesh, which this somehow lost. It was always like, you expect something from a game, and then when the actual game happens, you just look at it and go, huh, interesting. Just like that Zimbabwe versus Netherlands game, which anyone with the you know with simple knowledge of cricket would think, maybe Zimbabwe would win it rather easily, and then you see the whole game unfold before you and go, huh, that was interesting.
Yeah, again, like this underlined how close a lot of these teams are. Like, okay, India, Pakistan, South Africa are a level above the other three teams, but they're not so unreachable that none of the other three stand a chance of beating them. We saw this at the this World Cup. India had close run-ins with Bangladesh. Zimbabwe beat Pakistan. Netherlands beat South Africa, and even at the level between Bangladesh, Zimbabwe, the Netherlands, they beat each other. Um, so yeah, again, like it shows that the gap you might expect to exist between all these teams is not really there. They're a lot closer than a lot of people give them credit for, and yeah, like we saw that at this World Cup, and I really think like Group Two is why this World Cup will be remembered. Like Group One was fun, but Group Two was super chaotic, super back and forth, and yeah, like that's really the reason this World Cup is so great.
One thing that was better in group 2 than group 1 was, in group 1 we saw a lot of close games, but ultimately the result of most of them was what was expected of them. I mean, even Ireland defeating England is I mean, it is not really an upset to me, if you ask honestly. It might be an upset for a lot of people, but we have seen how Netherlands comes up against England. But in the group 2, I think there was a chance of unexpected result it came upon. I mean, firstly, like Zimbabwe beating Pakistan or Netherlands beating South Africa. So this was the group where teams actually finished the job at hand, instead of something like Ireland taking the game close with Australia and not winning it, or having a good start against New Zealand and then falling apart. That kind of stuff didn't happen in our group, and it was kind of exhilarating for.
Yeah, again, just a really crazy group. A lot of weird stuff happened, and yeah, like the unexpected results that seemed to be going that way ended up holding for the most part. Uh, yeah, like Pakistan did not make a comeback win against Zimbabwe. South Africa did not make a comeback win against the Netherlands. Um, and yeah, the Netherlands did not make a comeback win against Bangladesh to allow Bangladesh to upset them. And yeah, like it was a really fun group, and like it was really tense for a long time. And now that it's over, and Pakistan did make it out of it to make the semifinals, I can look back on it and say, that was a lot of fun, and I hope this happens more.
Yep, the group 2 was basically a lot of comedy and controversies blended together, and ultimately it was the upsets that made the group the best. And now that the Super 12 is done, I would love to ask you, who in your opinion, were the best batters or bowlers or performers in general to come out of the Super 12?
Like you can't really look past Sikandar Raza, I think, for just an all-round excellent performer throughout the Super 12s. He really kept Zimbabwe in a lot of their games, helped them win quite a few of the. Uh, like he was a key part of that win over Pakistan, and he kept them in for a long time against Bangladesh. And yeah, like he was a real standout. Uh, it's odd to think that like he almost wasn't a cricketer, and he almost didn't play cricket again in two separate instances in the last 3 years, both after Zimbabwe were suspended by the ITC and after he was diagnosed with a cancer in his arm. But he's come back and he continues to be one of Zimbabwe's star performers. And the reason they got so close to making the semifinals, the reason they got so close to making top four and automatically qualifying for the next World Cup, it's mainly down to Raza. Also want to give a shout out to Josh Little. Again, we talked about him a little before, but he was excellent, and he really could go on to be Ireland's best ever bowler, and at the very least, like their first bowler that really makes waves at higher at the the top level. And for Pakistan, the Shaheen Afridi's been a little disappointing. He's also been coming back from injury. He's not entirely fit, but I think Haris Rauf has really filled in for him, and he's been. I think Haris Rauf has been our best bowler best fast bowler this World Cup. Shadab Khan's also been very good with as a spin bowler, and even had some decent cameos with the bat. And yeah, like some amazing innings. There was Glenn Phillips against Sri Lanka. There was Kohli against Pakistan, which I'd rather not talk about. And we talked about Mikarim before. And there's just been a lot of great cricket this World Cup, and I hope that also gets remembered, not just for hardy har India beat Pakistan on the last ball. There was a lot more cricket that went on this World Cup, and I do hope that people remember that.
That is probably the point of the World Cup, isn't it? I mean, a lot of times, for a lot of people, ICC tournament or even Asia Cup becomes basically just an India versus Pakistan game. But this time it looked like it was such a World Cup where probably each game could grab your attention. No matter what kind of fan you are, you could be a seasonal fan or you could be a die-hard cricket fan. But this was the kind of World Cup that would probably make you notice. These teams like Zimbabwe, Ireland, even Afghanistan. I think they all did so well that you just can't ignore them. I guess and, if you follow the right part of the internet, then you could hear some talks about guys like Tector or Balbani or Sterling, or even obviously Sikandar Raza, who is more or less, I think, you and me can agree that he was the MVP of the tournament. In the qualifiers and Super 12 phase. But ultimately, I think that even an India Pakistan game that was probably one of the best T20 games played in general could not overshadow the whole tournament, and that tells a lot about the quality of this tournament.
Yeah, I'd hope that that's what the majority take away from this tournament. I feel like that's probably not what's going to happen. I feel like the India Pakistan game will live on in memory a lot more than than the other games, because it's just how cricket is, right? Like we talk, this tournament got a lot more eyeballs on a lot of these teams. It made a lot more people pay attention to a lot of these teams than in the past. But the fact of the matter is, of the however many people watch the India Pakistan game, 60% of them are not going to tune into another match this World Cup unless the final is India Pakistan. And there's no changing that. It's just the reality of how cricket is. That's why they keep trying to make more India Pakistan games, because most of the people who watch it will not watch another cricket match. And yeah, like I will complain about this a lot, and that's but yeah, there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm just gonna be content with the cricket that we did got, and the fact that some people did take notice of other teams, and I hope that they continue to take notice of them going forward. And I hope that 2024, when that tournament comes around, I do hope that a lot of people, the people that paid more attention to players, to different teams of this World Cup, they're more aware of the other teams coming through come 2024.
And now that the Super 12 is over, I mean, tomorrow we get Pakistan versus New Zealand at Sydney, and then day after tomorrow there's India versus England at Adelaide, and then Sunday is the final. So, what are your predictions for the two semifinals?
Well, um, I've already committed 100 unicorns to each of these predictions on the subreddit. So I'm gonna say Pakistan beats New Zealand, England beats India, and Pakistan wins the World Cup.
Fair enough, and I expect the opposite of it, but agree to disagree. Yeah, so that ends our coverage for today, and we'll see you after the World Cup ends. So that's that.